I promise you, I will never sugarcoat our challenges. Instead, I will talk with you directly and regularly about our plan, why we're doing what we're doing, what's working, what isn't, and what we're going to do next. So here's the current situation. The world, as I said earlier, is more dangerous and divided.
Washington insulted Canada, and Canada's response came within hours, and it was ice cold. Howard Lutnick, Donald Trump's Secretary of Commerce, sat in front of a camera this week and said something that every Canadian needs to hear. He mocked Canada's strategy. He ridiculed Prime Minister Carney personally. He questioned Canada's intelligence. And then he delivered two words that cut through every diplomatic pretense. They suck. That is what Trump's cabinet thinks of Canada. That is the level of respect Washington has for one of its closest allies, its largest trading partner, a country that has stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States in Kandahar, on Juno Beach, and at Vimy Ridge. But here is what Lutnick didn't count on. Within hours, Mark Carney sat down and delivered a message directly to Canadians. No press conference, no political theater, just a prime minister speaking directly to his people. Clearly, honestly, without spin. And what he said changed everything. Before we go further, buddy, if you want clear analysis of how Canada is standing strong against Washington's pressure, subscribe to Every Single Day. We cover the stories that matter. Now let's get into it. Let's start with what Carney actually said, because the words matter. Fire. He opened with a promise, not a political promise, a personal one. I promise you, I will never sugarcoat our challenges. Instead, I will talk with you directly and regularly about our plan. Why we're doing what we're doing. What's working, what isn't, and what we're going to do next. Think about what that means coming from a prime minister. No spin, no reassurance designed to make Canadians feel better than they should. Just reality delivered directly and without apology. And then he laid out that reality. The U.S. has fundamentally changed its approach to trade, raising its tariffs to levels last seen during the Great Depression. Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses. Weaknesses that we must correct. Great Depression levels, that is not a rhetorical flourish. That is a factual description of where American trade policy now stands. And Carney said it out loud, because Canadians deserve to know exactly what they are facing. Workers in auto, workers in steel, workers in lumber, real people in real communities facing real uncertainty because of decisions made in Washington by people like Howard Lutnick. The same man who called Canada terrible just hours earlier. Now let's think about what Carney is actually doing here, because this is not just a speech. This is a strategic declaration. For decades, Canadian prime ministers managed the relationship with Washington carefully, quietly, diplomatically. They absorbed pressure. They smoothed things over. They kept the peace. Even when the peace came at a cost to Canadian workers and Canadian industries. Carney is doing something fundamentally different. He is telling Canadians the truth out loud, on camera, without softening it. We can't rely on one foreign partner. We can't control the disruption coming from our neighbors. We can't bet our future on the hope that it will suddenly stop. 3 sentences, 3 truths that no Canadian prime minister has stated this clearly in a generation. And then he said something that directly answered Lutnick's mockery without ever mentioning his name. Hope isn't a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy. Lutnick said Canada's diversification strategy, building relationships with Europe, Asia, and China, was the worst he had ever heard. He said it was nuts. He said Canada sucks. Carney's response was 4 words. Hope isn't a plan. That is not the language of a country that is panicking. That is not the language of a country that is collapsing under pressure. That is the language of a country that has made a decision and is clears throat, moving forward with it regardless of what Washington thinks. Think about who Carney was speaking to when he delivered that message. Not to journalists, not to foreign leaders, not to markets or investors or analysts in Washington. He was speaking to a steelworker in Hamilton who is watching his industry face tariffs that make his job uncertain. He was speaking to a lumber worker in British Columbia whose mill is already feeling the pressure. He was speaking to an auto parts manufacturer in Windsor who doesn't know what next year looks like. He was speaking to every Canadian family that is trying to understand what is happening to their country and whether their government has a plan. And Carney's answer was simple, direct, and unprecedented in its honesty. I will never sugarcoat our challenges. That is a prime minister saying, I respect you enough to tell you the truth. I trust you enough to handle reality. And I am committed enough to this country to stand in front of you and say, this is hard, this is real, and here is what we are going to do about it. That kind of leadership is rare. And in a moment when Washington is producing insults, Canada is producing plans. Now, let's talk about the plan itself, because this is where Carney goes from diagnosis to direction. Canada Strong is our plan to build Canada by Canadians for Canadians. Its goals are ambitious: to catalyze $1 trillion in investment, to create one Canadian economy out of 13, clears throat, to build new trade and energy corridors, and to double the size of our clean energy capacity. $1 trillion, one Canadian economy, new corridors, double the energy capacity. Lutnick called Canada's strategy the worst he had ever heard. He called it nuts. He asked whether Carney actually understood how the global economy works. Here's what Lutnick doesn't understand. Canada has what the world wants: energy, critical minerals, food, water, advanced manufacturing, world-class universities, one of the most stable investment environments on the planet. Canada has what the world wants, from energy to education. We have the values to which most of the world aspires. And we're a reliable partner in a world that is anything but. A reliable partner in a world that is anything but. That last phrase is pointed, because everyone watching knows which country is currently the most unreliable partner in the global system. Everyone knows whose tariffs are at Great Depression levels. Everyone knows who called a neighbor and closest ally terrible. Carney didn't name Trump. He didn't need to. And then Carney did something that no policy announcement can fully capture. He connected this moment to Canada's history, not to romanticize it, not to use it as empty nationalism, but to remind Canadians that this is not the first time their country has faced pressure from a more powerful neighbor. Before Canada even existed on paper, it had a shape in Brock's imagination. Faced with the threat of an American invasion, Brock built alliances across our land and inspired what would eventually become Canada. General Isaac Brock, the War of 1812, an American invasion that Canada, before it was even officially Canada, stood up against and turned back. That statue sits on Carney's desk every morning, and he chose to tell Canadians about it because the message is unmistakable. Canada has faced American aggression before. Canada has been threatened before. And Canada has prevailed before. Not by matching America's volume, not by outshouting Washington, but by building alliances, by standing united, by refusing to be defined by the pressure placed upon it. And here's what nobody is talking about. Lutnick gave his interview. He insulted Canada. He mocked Carney. He called Canada's strategy the worst he had ever heard. And within hours, the Canadian Prime Minister released a video to his entire nation. Calm, prepared, detailed, honest, no insults, no theatrics, no bravado, just a plan. That contrast tells you everything about where the real strength lies in this relationship. Because when pressure is applied and one side responds with insults while the other responds with strategy, you already know which side is winning the long game. Carney said it himself. In a crisis, fortune favors the bold. Lutnick called Canada terrible. Carney announced a $1 trillion investment plan. Lutnick said Canada's strategy was nuts. Carney signed 20 new trade agreements on 4 continents. Lutnick couldn't remember the name of Canada's former deputy prime minister. Carney is rebuilding Canada's armed forces, doubling its clean energy capacity, and creating one unified Canadian economy. You decide who is serious, you decide who has a plan, and you decide who will still be standing when this crisis passes. Here is the full picture. Howard Lutnick sat in front of a camera and summed up Washington's view of Canada in 2 words: they suck. Mark Carney sat in front of a camera hours later and summed up Canada's response in 4 words. Hope isn't a plan. One side is angry, one side is building, one side is insulting, one side is investing, one side is reacting, one side is leading. We will get through this because of who we have always been, a country of tough, decent, caring people. People who grow stronger in adversity. It's our country, it's our future. We are taking back control to build Canada strong. That is your prime minister, that is your country, and that is the answer to every insult Washington has thrown across the border. Canada is not panicking. Canada is not collapsing. Canada is not waiting for Washington's permission to build its own future. Canada is moving. In Lutnick's words, far from stopping that movement may have accelerated it. Because nothing unites a country faster than being told it sucks by the people who are supposed to be your friends. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Carney's plan will succeed? Or does Canada need to go even further in breaking away from Washington? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. If this video gave you something to think about, subscribe to Canada Dispatch and hit like. Share this with every Canadian who needs to hear it. Next time, we are breaking down exactly what Canada's $1 trillion plan means for your job.